If you're fascinated by the rise of modern American conservatism, or if you want to understand how one charismatic writer reshaped political identity in the 20th century, or if you enjoy biographies that weave personal ambition with national transformation, and if you've ever wondered how ideas take root and become movements, if so, then today's book just might be for you. Today, I'll be reviewing Buckley, The Life and the Revolution That Shaped America by Sam Tanenhaus. Welcome to Spencer Reads Everything. I'm your host, Spencer Duncan. This is the channel where I read widely across fiction, nonfiction, history, politics, and anything else that catches my attention, and then bring you thoughtful, long-form reviews so you know exactly what to expect before you pick up a book. Today, I'm reviewing Buckley, The Life and the Revolution That Shaped America by Sam Tanenhaus. I first heard about this book through the podcast Know Your Enemy, which has had Tanenhaus on several times. The hosts frequently talked about their excitement for this biography and spent years anticipating its release. So when the book finally came out, I knew I needed to read it. I've always been interested in how political movements take shape and how individual writers help steer them. So this seemed like a perfect choice for this channel. A little bit about Sam Tanenhaus. Sam Tanenhaus is an American journalist, historian, and biographer known for his careful research and his ability to situate individual lives within larger political and cultural currents. He has served as editor of the New York Times Book Review and the New York Times Week in Review, positions that allowed him to shape national conversations about literature, politics, and public life. His work often focuses on moments of ideological transformation and on the thinkers who helped define those shifts. Before writing his biography of William F. Buckley Jr., Tanenhaus was widely recognized for Whitaker Chambers, a biography, which was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in 97 or 98. That book demonstrated his interest in the mid-20th century conservative movement and the personalities who animated it. Tanenhaus brings the same attention to primary sources, personal letters, and political networks to this new biography. His reputation for thorough archival work and for approaching controversial figures with both fairness and clarity makes him well suited to tell Buckley's story. A little background on this specific biography. It is the result of a long and unusually extended research process. Sam Tanenhaus began working on the biography more than 20 years ago, and for much of that time, the project acquired a kind of legendary status among scholars and journalists and listeners of podcasts like Know Your Enemy. Buckley himself even granted Tanenhaus extensive access to his papers, correspondence, and personal archives, and Tanenhaus conducted interviews with many of the central figures in Buckley's life. The long timeline allowed him to watch the conservative movement continue to evolve, giving the final book a broader perspective than if it had been written in the immediate aftermath of Buckley's most active years. The biography also arrives at a moment when scholars and readers are re-examining the origins of modern conservatism. Buckley's influence on print culture, television, public debates, and party politics makes him a key figure for anyone trying to understand how 20th century conservatism took shape. Tanenhaus approaches him neither as a caricature nor a simple icon, but as a man whose personal charm, intellectual curiosity, and appetite for debate played a major role in shaping the institutions and ideas that defined the movement. The result is a biography that is not only about Buckley himself, but also about the networks of writers, thinkers, and activists who surrounded him and the broader cultural movement that made his rise possible. Tanenhaus frames the book as part archival excavation and part political history, creating a study that is as much about the construction of a movement and the life of one man. Before I get into the biography itself, I make a mistake when I cover biographies that I maybe don't actually explain much about who the individual was, and jumping right into a very detailed analysis of the biography may not be super helpful. So let me start by giving you a very short biography of William F. Buckley himself, and then we will dive into each of the sections and I will give you a little more feedback on each of those. So, who was William F. Buckley Jr.? William F. Buckley Jr. was one of the most influential conservative writers and public intellectuals of the 20th century. Born in 1925 into a wealthy, politically engaged Catholic family, Buckley grew up surrounded by debates about faith, economics, and the role of the United States in the world. He attended Yale, where he made an early name for himself as a sharp and provocative thinker who relished intellectual combat. Buckley rose to national prominence in the 1950s with his book God and Man at Yale, which was a critique of what he saw as the university's secular and collectivist culture. But his most lasting contribution came from the founding of National Review in 1955. The magazine became the central institution of modern American conservatism, helping to unify traditionalists, free market advocates, and anti-communists under a single banner. Buckley served not only as its editor, but also as its public face, shaping the tone and direction of the movement for decades. Beyond print, Buckley became a cultural figure through television. His long-running program Firing Line brought extended political dialogue into living rooms across the country. Buckley's distinctive manner of speaking, his pleasure in debate, and his ability to engage both allies and opponents made him an unusually visible intellectual presence in American life. Over the course of his career, Buckley wrote dozens of books, contributed to countless debates, and helped mentor the next generation of conservative thinkers. Whether admired or criticized, he was impossible to ignore. His influence on political identity, media culture, and the shape of conservative thought makes him a key figure for understanding American politics in the second half of the 20th century. So that is a broad overview of William F. Buckley himself. Now let's take a look at this biography. It is huge. It's over 800 pages. I think it's over 1,000 pages total. And it is split into 5 parts. And so let me tell you about each of those parts. Part 1, Prodigy in the Making, covers chapters 1 through 12. Tanenhaus begins Buckley's story not with the famous public figure of the 1950s and 60s, but with the world that created him. The first 12 chapters trace Buckley's childhood from his family's Texas and Mexican roots into the rarefied environment of Great Elm, the expansive Connecticut estate where he grew up. The Buckleys lived in a world refined by Catholic faith, multilingual education, and the intense charisma of his father, William F. Buckley Sr., who was a businessman whose success and failures really shaped the family's identity. Buckley's early years were filled with dramatic contrasts. He absorbed his father's fierce anti-communism and suspicion of federal power, ideas that had sharp roots in the upheavals of the Mexican Revolution and the New Deal. He also inherited a sense of aristocratic detachment, reinforced by a household full of tutors, governesses, and Mexican maids, and visiting exiles. His schooling was irregular but deeply formative, periods of home instruction balanced with time in elite European schools, where he acquired fluency in French and Spanish before he ever really mastered English, at least so he said. Tanenhaus highlights the intensity already visible in Buckley as a child. He excelled in writing, sailing, and music, and he cultivated an early sense of theatricality, intelligence, and performance. But he was also prone to mischief and eager to prove himself, especially to his distant and complicated parents. His mother's public displays of Catholic devotion and his father's political passions became the twin poles of his worldview. In these chapters, we watch the formation not only of a conservative icon, but of a young man driven by a need for approval, distinction, and ideological clarity. By the end of part 1, Buckley leaves home for boarding school. He is bright, restless, deeply pious, and already steeped in the political worldview that will eventually animate his adult career. The raw ingredients of William F. Buckley Jr. are all present. What remains is the transformation of talent into public identity. Part 2, At Odds with His Time. This covers chapters 13 through 25. In part 2, Tanenhaus moves from Buckley's privileged and unconventional childhood into his early adulthood, a period defined by tension, ideological sharpening, and the first hints of the public figure he would become. These chapters cover the years roughly between 1951 and 1960, when Buckley leaves Millbrook and Yale, enters the Army, publishes God and Man at Yale, and begins building the intellectual foundations of modern conservatism. Tanenhaus emphasizes that despite Buckley's confidence and charm, he enters this period out of step with the cultural and political currents of the post-war era. His aggressive anti-communism, fierce Catholic identity, and nostalgia for hierarchy and tradition placed him at odds with the liberal consensus that dominated American political life, especially at a place like Yale. Yet, this sense of alienation becomes a crucial asset. It sharpened his arguments and it pushed him to articulate a coherent conservative worldview at a moment when no such consensus existed on the right. These chapters trace Buckley's battles on multiple fronts. At Yale, he railed against what he saw as creeping secularism and collectivism. After graduating, he entered the Army, where his distaste for bureaucracy only deepened, but it was the publication of God and Man at Yale in 1951 that made him a national figure. The book accused the university of betraying its Christian and free market heritage, igniting controversy and earning him both admirers and a lot of detractors. Tanenhaus shows Buckley learning almost instinctively how to court publicity, how to turn criticism into momentum, and how to use polemic as a tool for building identity and audience. Yet the most revealing material in part 2 concerns Buckley's involvement with early conservative groups and causes. He becomes a defender of Senator Joseph McCarthy and a critic of the Republican establishment. He writes on racial politics, including the South's defense of segregation, in ways that remain, to this day, pretty troubling. Tanenhaus does not shield the reader from these contradictions. Instead, he shows how Buckley's early positions were shaped by a mix of inherited prejudice, as well as loyalty to anti-communist allies and an unyielding belief in order and tradition. These chapters portray a young man who is brilliant, energetic, and rhetorically powerful, but also very reactive, combative, and not yet fully in control of the political movement that he is helping to form. By the end of part 2, Buckley stands at a crossroads. He has the talent, the platform, and the ambition to shape American conservatism, but he does not yet have the institutional base to do it. That will change dramatically, of course, in the next section. Which brings us to part 3, Buckley's Revolution. This covers chapters 26 through 33. Part 3 marks the true turning point of the biography. Tanenhaus shows Buckley moving from a provocative young polemicist into a central architect of modern conservatism. The years covered here are 1961 to 1965, and they are the years when Buckley consolidates his influence, reshapes the right, and becomes a public figure who is impossible to ignore. The section begins with Buckley standing on the threshold of a new decade, armed with the momentum of National Review and the confidence of someone who believes he has a movement to build. Tanenhaus presents Buckley as both visionary and an improviser. His talent for networking, persuasion, and institutional leadership now takes center stage. He cultivates young conservative writers, he forms alliances across the right's many factions, and he acts as a gatekeeper, marginalizing extremists while bringing traditionalists, libertarians, and anti-communists under a single intellectual framework. Buckley's public persona also undergoes a transformation. Chapters on his confrontation with the John Birch Society highlight the delicate balancing act that he performs. He recognizes that a conservative movement tainted by conspiracy theories will lose any hope of mainstream credibility. At the same time, he understands the importance of maintaining a broad coalition. Tanenhaus is particularly strong here, showing Buckley's strategic mind at work as he positions National Review as both the conscience and the moderator of the right. These chapters also highlight Buckley's growing presence on the national stage. His television appearances begin to multiply, his debates become major events, his charisma and linguistic agility turn him into the face of conservative intellectualism. Tanenhaus stresses that in an era dominated by Kennedy liberalism, Buckley represents something new, a confident, sharp, urbane conservative who can spar with opponents without yielding an inch of ground. The final chapters of Part 3 focus on one of the most theatrical episodes of Buckley's life, his 1965 campaign for mayor in New York City. Tanenhaus makes clear that the campaign was never about winning. It was a meticulously crafted performance meant to elevate conservatism into a legitimate urban political presence and to give Buckley a national platform. His famous line, when asked what he would do if he won, he said, "Demand a recount," which of course captures both the self-awareness and the showmanship of the moment. The campaign demonstrated that Buckley could use politics not merely to reflect ideas, but to stage them. It cemented his status as both a political thinker and a political actor. By the end of Part 3, Buckley has achieved what once seemed impossible. He has taken a fractured, marginalized set of right-wing philosophies and forged them into something recognizable, coherent, and increasingly powerful. The revolution that he leads is not yet complete, but the direction is unmistakable, which brings us to Part 4, Controlling the Message. This covers chapters 34 through 44. It follows Buckley into the heart of his public career from 1966 to 1974, a period when he becomes not only a prominent conservative writer, but one of the most recognizable political personalities in the United States. These chapters show Tanenhaus shifting focus from Buckley the movement builder to Buckley the media strategist, performer, and master of narrative control. The centerpiece of this section is Buckley's growing dominance in the mass media landscape. His show Firing Line launched in 1966, and it became the most important vehicle for his ideas and his persona. Tanenhaus pays close attention to how Buckley uses the show not as a neutral form, but as a stage where he can frame debate on his own terms. His mannerisms, his wit, his impeccable timing, and his control of tone all contribute to his authority. Even opponents more knowledgeable on specific issues often appear flustered or unsettled beside him. Buckley turns conversation into spectacle and spectacle into ideological influence. These chapters also depict Buckley as a figure navigating the cultural and political upheavals of the late 1960s. The Vietnam War, student protest movements, and shifts in public morality force him to refine his message. He becomes both a critic and participant in the culture wars. His stance against the anti-war left, his arguments about constitutional order, and his interpretation of American decline show a man trying to articulate a conservative response to widespread crisis. Tanenhaus depicts Buckley not as a reactionary shouting from the margins, but as someone who believes he is preserving a cultural inheritance that is under siege. Equally important in this section are the strains within Buckley's own movement. He navigates divisions between hawks and doves, between libertarians and traditionalists, and between establishment conservatives and insurgent voices on the right. His role becomes more managerial. He edits, he reprimands, encourages, and sidelines as necessary. The phrase controlling the message applies not only to his public appearance, but to his private leadership within the conservative coalition. The author Tanenhaus pays careful attention to Buckley's contradictions here as well. Buckley's defense of order sometimes leads him to positions that feel increasingly out of touch. His arguments about morality and authority place him in tension with the very cultural shifts that make him a celebrity, yet he remains aware of the power of performance. His advocacy is political, but it is also theatrical, a balancing act between defending his core beliefs and adapting to a media environment that rewards spectacle. By the end of Part 4, Buckley is no longer merely the intellectual founding father of the movement, he is its most visible and influential interpreter. Through National Review and through his syndicated columns and through Firing Line, he maintains a remarkable degree of control over how conservatism presents itself to the country. The movement has outgrown the early years of crisis and fragmentation. Buckley now stands at its center, shaping it through his voice, his charisma, and his relentless attention to the story it tells about itself. Part 5, Last Campaigns. Part 5 follows Buckley into the later decades of his life, when he remains a commanding presence in American political and cultural life, even as the conservative movement he helped shape begins to evolve beyond him. Tanenhaus shows a man who continues to write, debate, travel, and of course host Firing Line, but who increasingly operates from a position of elder statesmanship rather than active leadership. A central theme of this final section is Buckley's growing ambivalence toward the populist turn of the conservative movement in the 1980s and 1990s. He recognizes the political power of a more populist, grievance-driven right, but he retains the aristocratic, cosmopolitan style that had defined his own intellectual conservatism. The chapters titled Blue Collar versus Blue Blood capture this divide vividly. Buckley is not out of touch, but he is increasingly out of step with elements of a movement that value outrage over argument and performance over persuasion. Tanenhaus also highlights Buckley's relentless productivity during these years. He writes books at a staggering pace, including memoirs and historical novels, and he continues to appear on television and at lectures nationwide. The portrait here is of a man who never fully slows down, even as age and exhaustion begin to take a toll. Of course, the emotional core of Part 5 comes with the declining health and the eventual death of his wife, Pat, in 2007. His marriage had always been a mixture of glamour, companionship, and a shared social life, and her loss leaves Buckley grief-stricken. Tanenhaus handles this period with sensitivity, portraying a man whose public persona remains sharp, but whose private world is very shaken. Buckley's relationship with his son Christopher continues and remains part of the biography's final chapters, but Tanenhaus emphasizes that Pat's death marks the final major rupture in Buckley's personal life. By the time Buckley dies in 2008, he leaves behind a conservative movement far larger and more contentious than the one he began shaping in the 1950s. Tanenhaus's closing chapters stress that Buckley's legacy is not a simple one. He built institutions, he set intellectual standards, he created a distinctive public style, and he nurtured generations of conservative writers and thinkers. But he also struggled to reconcile his ideal of conservatism with the more populist forms that it began to take on. His life ends not in triumph or despair, but in a reflective recognition that movements, once created, inevitably move beyond their creators. There is a lot in there, and there's a lot to say about this biography, but I would like to point out some of the argumentative distinctions that Sam Tanenhaus is making all throughout this biography. One of the strengths of Tanenhaus's biography is that it does not simply recount Buckley's life, it interprets it. Throughout the book, Tanenhaus makes a series of careful, often subtle argumentative distinctions that help the reader understand how Buckley's ideas operated within the larger story of 20th century conservatism. The first major distinction is between Buckley, the ideologue, and Buckley, the coalition builder. Tanenhaus shows that Buckley possessed deeply held beliefs about faith, tradition, and individual liberty, but he was never content to remain a solitary intellectual. His real gift was institutional. He shaped National Review into a forum where different conservative impulses could be refined, disciplined, and fused into a coherent movement. In Tanenhaus's view, Buckley became a kind of editor-in-chief of the conservative imagination, vetting its fringes and channeling its energies into something that could influence national politics. A second distinction emerges in Tanenhaus's treatment of Buckley's relationship to populism. Buckley often spoke for elite institutions. His upbringing, education, and manner of speaking all reflected a patrician sensibility. Yet he also championed anti-communist causes, religious traditionalism, and cultural arguments that resonated deeply with ordinary voters. Tanenhaus argues that this tension between aristocratic restraint and populist appeal both energized and complicated Buckley's career. He could inspire middle-class Americans while also keeping the movement tethered to ideas rather than anger. But over time, the populist energies Buckley helped mobilize became harder to control. A third distinction appears in the biography's handling of Buckley's most controversial positions, particularly on race, civil rights, and McCarthyism. Tanenhaus neither excuses these views nor reduces them to caricature. Instead, he argues that they reveal the contradictions embedded in mid-century conservatism. A desire to defend constitutional order, a distrust of rapid social change, and a tendency to read political conflict through the lens of anti-communist struggle. Buckley's later reconsideration of some of these positions becomes an important part of the narrative, not because it absolves him, but because it illustrates how his moral imagination could evolve. Finally, Tanenhaus draws a consistent distinction between Buckley the performer and Buckley the thinker. The media figure who sparred on firing line was charismatic, he was witty, and he was sometimes theatrical. The writer behind the scenes was, on the other hand, painstaking, reflective, and deeply committed to argument. Tanenhaus treats these as complementary rather than contradictory facets. Buckley understood that ideas need platforms and that persuasion is as much about style as it is about content. His genius, Tanenhaus suggests, lay in combining both of them. These distinctions give the biography its interpretive power. They help the reader see Buckley not as a myth or a villain or a saint, but as a man shaped by competing impulses who managed through talent and determination to give structure and voice to an entire political movement. I personally enjoyed this biography well enough. And there is no question that Sam Tanenhaus is a gifted biographer. He writes with clarity, depth, and a remarkable command of historical context. I am always drawn to long biographies, especially when they take the time to situate a figure in the wider cultural and political world, and Tanenhaus certainly delivers that. His research is impressive, his pacing deliberate, and his portrait of Buckley feels both critical and fair. That being said, this book was ultimately a bit too long for me. William F. Buckley Jr. is someone I have always been curious about, a central figure in American political life whose influence is undeniable. I appreciated learning about the complexities of his upbringing, the evolution of his ideas, and his role in shaping the conservative movement. But I also found myself growing pretty fatigued with him as a subject. Buckley's personality, his style, and his sheer omnipresence in mid-century politics made him fascinating, but they also make him exhausting to live with across hundreds of pages. So by the time I reached the final chapters, I was ready for the tome to be over. I'm glad I read it, and I understand why it has been so highly anticipated and discussed, but it is not a biography I see myself returning to. I walked away with a clearer sense of who William F. Buckley Jr. was as one of the most important politicians in modern American history, and that alone made the journey worthwhile, but I was also relieved to finally close the book. So who is this for? This biography is for readers who genuinely enjoy long-form political history and are willing to follow a single figure across decades of American life. If you appreciate detailed, carefully researched accounts of intellectual movements, this will be deeply satisfying. Sam Tanenhaus writes with the kind of narrative patience that rewards readers who like to see how ideas take shape, how institutions form, and how personalities evolve in response to changing political landscapes. It is also for anyone who wants to understand the origins of modern American conservatism. William F. Buckley Jr. played a pivotal role in unifying the right, disciplining its extremes, and giving it a public voice. If you have ever wondered how conservatism transitioned from a scattered set of impulses into a coherent movement, this book offers that story in full. Students of media history will also find a lot here. Buckley's transformation from print intellectual to television personality illustrates how politics became performance in the late 20th century. Readers interested in the history of political communication, public debate, or the rise of televised discourse will find Tanenhaus's treatment very insightful. Finally, this is for readers who enjoy biographies that do not merely recount a life, but interpret it. Tanenhaus's distinctions, his judgments, and his narrative choices give the book an intellectual depth that will appeal to those who want history with a clear, argumentative through line. Who is this not for? Well, this is not a book for readers looking for a quick overview of William F. Buckley Jr. or a brisk introduction to the conservative movement. Obviously, in over 800 pages, that's just not going to happen. Tanenhaus's biography is long, dense, and committed to covering every stage of Buckley's life in detail. If you prefer concise biographies that move quickly from one major moment to the next, this one will likely feel overwhelming. It is also not for readers who are only mildly curious about Buckley. His personality is large, his presence constant, and his influence pervasive across the book's 1,000+ pages. I think it's about 800 or so of actually reading, and then quite a few of additional material. If you find him difficult to warm up to, or if his style of conservatism feels far too removed from your interest, you may find the extended narration tiring. Tanenhaus asks you to stay with Buckley for a long time, and that investment will not pay off for readers who want something lighter or more tightly focused. Likewise, this is not for readers hoping for a purely celebratory or a purely critical portrait. Tanenhaus takes a balanced approach. He does not gloss over Buckley's controversial positions on stuff like civil rights and race and, of course, McCarthyism, as I've already mentioned, but neither does he reduce him to those moments. Readers looking for a polemic one way or the other will find this biography too nuanced for their taste. Finally, this is not ideal for readers uninterested in the inner workings of media, institutions, and political strategy. Much of the book deals with the building of national review, the shaping of conservative networks, and the interplay between ideology and public communication. If your interest lies more in political outcomes than in how movements are constructed behind the scenes, you might find those sections to be quite slow. Buckley, The Life and the Revolution That Shaped America, is an impressive and exhaustive work of political biography. Sam Tanenhaus's research, his command of the subject, and his ability to trace the evolution of modern conservatism through the life of one man all make this a significant contribution to the field. I gained a deeper understanding of William F. Buckley Jr., not just as a public intellectual, but as a builder of institutions and as someone who genuinely shaped the conservative movement. At the same time, this was a very long book, and I felt the length. I enjoy large biographies, but Buckley as a figure can be draining, and by the end I was ready to step away from him. Even so, I'm grateful I read it. Tanenhaus gives you the full sweep of Buckley's life, and if you want to understand how modern conservatism was crafted, argued for, and presented to the American public, this biography provides that story in full. Of course, I would like to know what your thoughts on this book are, or anything by Sam Tanenhaus, or other books about William F. Buckley, or by William F. Buckley. Please let me know what you're thinking in the comments. While you're here, please check out more of my videos. I have a wide variety of videos, be it on legendary biographies, high fantasy, young adult novels, or anything in between. Please find something that interests you, watch it, and let me know what you're thinking. And if you're enjoying this video, or any of my videos, please share them. The more people who know about my channel, the more videos I can make. And don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on those notifications, and until next time, keep those pages turning.